On Christmas Eve, my mom pointed at the front door and screamed, "Take your little girl and leave." My 5-year-old daughter wrapped both arms around my leg while everyone else at the table looked down at their plates. 8 years later, that same front door opened for me again, but this time they were the ones praying I wouldn't walk away. Stick with me because nothing about what happened next was what I expected. Before we get into it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. 8 years earlier, Ava and I drove through the snow to my parents' house in Fort Wayne, Indiana. She had spent the entire ride talking about cookies, Christmas lights, and whether Grandpa had remembered to hang the giant wooden star above the porch. She was only 5, still young enough to believe every family gathered around the same kind of table. The house looked exactly as I remembered. Warm light spilled through the windows, and the smell of roasted turkey greeted us before we even stepped inside. My father, Robert, hugged Ava with a tired smile while my sister Claire admired the little red dress I'd bought for her at a thrift store. For a brief moment, I thought maybe this Christmas would be different. Halfway through dinner, my mother Janice stood and tapped her glass with a spoon. "I have a surprise," she announced, smiling toward the living room. A man I had never seen before walked in carrying an expensive bottle of wine. He looked to be in his 50s, dressed in a tailored suit, and wore the confident smile of someone who believed he belonged wherever he entered. Janice beamed. "Brr, this is Richard. He's a successful businessman, a widower, and he's been looking forward to meeting you." I stared at her, certain I had misunderstood. She continued as if she were introducing guests at a holiday party instead of arranging my future. "You deserve stability, and Ava deserves a proper home." Richard pulled out the empty chair beside him. "Why don't you come sit over here?" I didn't move. "I'm not interested," I said calmly. "You should have asked me before inviting someone here for this." The smile disappeared from Janice's face. "You refuse every opportunity one give you," she snapped. "You're making life harder than it has to be." "I'm raising my daughter just fine," I replied. "I'm not marrying a stranger because you decided it's convenient." Her chair scraped loudly against the floor as she stood. Pointing toward the front door, she shouted, "Then take your little girl and leave." The room fell silent. Robert lowered his eyes without saying a word. Claire sighed and quietly muttered, "Mom's only trying to help." Ava clung tightly to my leg, confused by the shouting. I took her hand, picked up our coats, and walked out into the freezing Christmas night without looking back. The cold hit us the instant the front door slammed behind us. Snow drifted across the driveway as Ava squeezed my hand with both of hers. "Mom," she whispered, "are we still having Christmas?" I forced a smile even though my throat burned. "We are. It'll just be a different kind of Christmas." Our gifts were still sitting under my parents' tree, but I wasn't going back inside to get them. I buckled Ava into her car seat, brushed snow off the windshield with my sleeve, and started driving without any real destination. The streets were nearly empty and holiday lights blurred through my tears. After stopping at 3 places with no vacancies, I finally found an aging roadside motel on the edge of town. The room smelled faintly of old carpet and cheap disinfectant, but it had heat, 2 beds, and a tiny television playing Christmas movies. I apologized as I unlocked the door. "I'm sorry, this isn't what I promised." Ava looked around, climbed onto one of the beds, and smiled. "It has pillows," she said. "And we're together." Her words broke something inside me. That night our Christmas dinner came from a vending machine and a fast food restaurant that happened to be open. We shared chicken nuggets, fries, and a small chocolate pie while watching cartoons. Before falling asleep, Ava placed her little stocking on the chair beside her bed. "Santa can still find us," she said confidently. The next morning I made a decision that frightened me as much as it freed me. There was nothing left for us in Indiana except painful memories. I packed everything we owned into my aging sedan and drove south toward Nashville, Tennessee, where a former coworker had told me jobs were easier to find. The beginning wasn't glamorous. We rented a tiny apartment above an auto repair shop where the walls shook every time someone tested an engine downstairs. During the day I worked wherever someone would hire me. I waited tables, stocked grocery shelves before sunrise, cleaned office buildings after dark, and answered phones at a small insurance agency whenever extra hours became available. Every dollar had a purpose. Rent came first. Groceries came second. Anything left went into a savings envelope hidden inside a kitchen cabinet. After putting Ava to bed each night, I opened accounting textbooks borrowed from the public library. Some nights I could barely keep my eyes open, but I kept studying because I knew temporary jobs couldn't become our permanent future. Ava never complained. She did her homework at the kitchen table while I completed assignments beside her. Sometimes we'd quiz each other. She practiced spelling words while I reviewed tax laws and financial statements. We laughed whenever one of us got an answer wrong. Years passed one ordinary day at a time. There were no miracles waiting around the corner, only steady progress earned through persistence. Eventually I became a certified accountant, opened a small practice, and watched it grow through honest work and satisfied clients. We built a quiet life filled with routines, trust, and peace. For the first time, home wasn't a place controlled by someone else's expectations. It was wherever Ava and I were together. The years didn't change everything overnight. They changed us through thousands of ordinary moments that slowly became a life. Every birthday we celebrated in our little Nashville apartment felt lighter than the last. When business improved, we moved into a modest house with a small backyard. Ava insisted on planting flowers along the fence, even though neither of us knew much about gardening. By the second spring they were blooming anyway. She grew from the little girl who believed every motel was an adventure into a thoughtful 13-year-old with quick wit and endless curiosity. She loved reading mystery novels, played volleyball after school, and never let me leave the house without reminding me to eat lunch. Sometimes I caught glimpses of myself in her determination, but she carried a confidence I never had at her age. My accounting practice grew one client at a time. Small business owners recommended me to their friends because I answered calls, explained complicated numbers in plain language, and treated every customer with respect. Before long I hired 2 employees, then another. Seeing our firm's name on the office window for the first time felt better than any title or paycheck. It represented a future I had built instead of one someone else had planned for me. Life settled into routines we both loved. Mornings began with breakfast together before school and work. Evenings usually ended around the dinner table where Ava told me about teachers, teammates, and whatever new idea had captured her attention that week. Our home was quiet, but it never felt empty. As Christmas approached again, the office filled with holiday cards from clients. Ava was helping me decorate a small tree in the reception area when my phone rang. The screen displayed a name I hadn't seen in 8 years. For a moment I simply stared at it. "You going to answer?" Ava asked. "I think I have to." His voice sounded older than I remembered. "Leora?" "Yes. I wasn't sure this was still your number." "It is. What's going on?" He hesitated before speaking again. "It's your dad. Robert had a heart attack last week." I gripped the edge of my desk. "Is he alive?" "Yeah. He's home now, but the doctors told him he can't keep working the way he has." I closed my eyes. "And the hardware store?" Ty let out a weary laugh with no humor in it. "It's barely hanging on. The big chain stores kept expanding, online orders took more customers every year, and people begged your parents to update the business. New inventory systems, online sales, local delivery, anything. Your dad refused because he said the old way had always worked. Your mom shut down every suggestion before anyone could even try it. So it wasn't one bad year. No. It was 8 years of saying no to change." Silence settled between us. Finally Ty spoke again. "They're talking about closing the store after Christmas. I know you don't owe anyone anything, Leora. I just thought, you deserve to know what's happened back here." After I ended the call, I set my phone on the desk and stared through the office window. Cars passed outside, people hurried along the sidewalk carrying shopping bags, and Christmas music drifted in from a nearby cafe. Everything around me continued as if nothing had happened, but my thoughts had already traveled 800 miles north. Ava quietly finished hanging an ornament before walking over. "Was that someone from Indiana?" I nodded. "Grandpa had a heart attack." Her face fell. She barely remembered him, yet she still cared. "Is he going to be okay?" "They think so. He needs to slow down." She waited for a moment before asking the question I knew was coming. "Are we going back?" I didn't answer immediately because I honestly didn't know. For the next several days I tried to focus on work, but my attention kept slipping. Every file I opened reminded me that life rarely gives you perfect endings. I wasn't afraid of seeing my parents again. I was afraid of reopening wounds that had finally healed. One evening, Ava sat across from me at the kitchen table while finishing her homework. "I've been thinking," she said. "That's usually dangerous." She smiled. "I don't remember much about where I was born. Maybe it's time I did." I looked up. "You don't have to protect me from your past forever." Her words stayed with me long after she went to bed. The following morning I called the office, rearranged appointments, packed 2 suitcases and loaded the car. Before sunrise we started the long drive toward Fort Wayne. The miles passed beneath us as familiar highways slowly replaced unfamiliar ones. Fields stretched across the landscape, covered with a thin blanket of snow. The closer we came to Indiana, the more memories returned without invitation. Every exit sign seemed connected to another piece of my childhood. Late in the afternoon we reached the city limits. "Is this it?" Ava asked as she looked out the window. "Yes. It feels quiet." It always was. The neighborhoods looked older than I remembered. Several storefronts stood empty, and faded signs hung above buildings that had clearly seen better years. Even the streets seemed slower. When we turned onto my parents' road, I almost missed the house. The white paint had faded, parts of the fence leaned at odd angles, and the porch where my father once spent summer evenings looked neglected. Christmas lights hung unevenly from the roof, with several dark sections where bulbs no longer worked. They weren't cheerful decorations anymore. They looked like something someone put up because they couldn't imagine not doing it. We drove past the family hardware store before stopping. The parking lot that had once been packed every weekend held only 3 cars. Dusty displays filled the front windows and faded sale posters curled at the edges. The building itself seemed tired. Ava looked from the empty store to the worn house. Softly she asked, "Did all this happen because you left?" I slowly shook my head. "No. This happened because nobody here was willing to change. Time did what I never could. It forced them to face the choices they'd been avoiding for years." I parked across the street and sat behind the wheel for a long moment. The house looked smaller than it had in my memories, but the front door was the same one that had closed behind us 8 years earlier. Ava glanced at me without saying anything. She understood this wasn't a moment to rush. We walked up the worn steps together and knocked. After several seconds the door opened. My father stood there looking thinner than I remembered. His shoulders had slumped, his hair was almost completely gray, and the confidence that once defined him had disappeared. His eyes widened when he saw Ava standing beside me. "You've grown so much," he whispered. She offered a polite smile but stayed close to my side. Robert stepped back to let us in. The house felt strangely quiet. Furniture hadn't changed, but everything looked older, as though time had settled into every corner. Christmas decorations were scattered around the room without much care. Janice walked in from the kitchen and stopped when she saw us. No one spoke for several seconds. Finally she broke the silence. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure either," I answered. She nodded toward the living room and we all sat down. The conversation stumbled through awkward questions about work, school, and the drive from Nashville. Every sentence felt carefully chosen, as though everyone feared saying the wrong thing. I finally looked directly at my mother. "I've spent 8 years wondering something." She met my eyes. "What? Why was having me there so unbearable? Was I really that embarrassing to you?" Janice looked away almost immediately. "It wasn't like that." "Then tell me what it was." She folded her hands together tightly before answering. "Our town notices everything. People talk. They judge. When you came home pregnant and unmarried, I couldn't stop thinking about what everyone would say." I stared at her. "So this was never about me." She shook her head slowly. "It was about how they would see our family. I kept believing that if I could somehow fix your situation, people would stop talking. You tried to marry me off to a man I'd never met. I thought stability would silence the gossip." I let out a quiet laugh filled with disbelief. "You were protecting your reputation, not your daughter." She didn't argue because she couldn't. The room fell silent until my father spoke. "I should have stopped it." I turned toward him. "I wanted to," he continued. "Every time I disagreed with your mother, we'd fight for days. Eventually it felt easier to stay quiet." "Easier for who?" I asked. His face tightened. "Not for me. Not really. You watched her throw your daughter and granddaughter out on Christmas Eve." "I know. You didn't even follow us outside." His eyes filled with tears. "I've replayed that night more times than I can count. I convinced myself I was keeping the peace, but all I really did was lose both of you. My silence cost me 8 years with my daughter, and 8 years watching my granddaughter grow up." No one had another excuse left to offer. The silence in the living room lingered until the front door opened. Cold air swept inside as Claire stepped in carrying a grocery bag. She stopped the moment she saw me. "Leora, it's been a while." She set the bag on the kitchen counter without taking her eyes off me. "I heard you were coming, but I didn't believe Mom." Ava watched quietly as Claire walked over. After a brief hesitation she smiled. "You must be Ava." "I am." I'm your Aunt Claire. They shook hands awkwardly before Claire sat across from me. For a few minutes we talked about ordinary things, avoiding the past as if ignoring it might make the visit easier. Eventually Claire sighed. I don't think pretending is helping anyone. No, I agreed. It isn't. She looked down at her hands. I owe you an apology. I waited. When we were younger, Mom always compared us. You were the difficult one. I was the responsible one. I liked hearing that. I liked being the daughter who could do no wrong. I wasn't surprised, but hearing her admit it still hurt. So when Mom criticized me, you stayed quiet. I did more than stay quiet. Sometimes I agreed with her because it kept me on her good side. The honesty in her voice left little room for anger. I thought being the favorite meant I was winning, she continued. I didn't realize what it was costing me. What changed? Claire laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. Nothing changed. I just finally noticed. She leaned back and glanced toward Janice. Mom didn't stop controlling things after you left. She just focused all that attention on me. Janice shifted uncomfortably but didn't interrupt. When I wanted to move closer to my husband's job, she convinced us to stay here. When we tried to buy a house, she insisted on approving every neighborhood. She questioned how we spent money, criticized how I raised the kids, and somehow every family decision became hers. Claire rubbed her forehead. I kept telling myself she was only trying to help, the same excuse I used 8 years ago. After a while I couldn't tell which choices were actually mine. I remembered the confident sister I had grown up with. The woman sitting in front of me seemed exhausted. I lost my family in one night, I said quietly. Claire nodded. And I lost myself one small piece at a time. The words settled heavily over the room. I used to envy you, Claire admitted. I looked at her in disbelief. You envied me? Not when you left. But later. You built a life where nobody told you who to be. I stayed because I thought loyalty meant obedience. I kept waiting for Mom to finally trust my judgment. She smiled sadly. It never happened. Janice lowered her head, unable to deny what her daughter was saying. Claire looked at Ava. Seeing you two together makes me realize something. Your mom broke away even though it hurt. I stayed because it felt easier. Turns out the harder choice gave her freedom. The easier choice slowly became its own kind of prison. No one challenged her. Deep down, everyone in the room knew she was telling the truth. The next morning, Robert insisted on opening the hardware store even though the doctor had ordered him to rest. He moved slowly as he unlocked the front door, pausing once to catch his breath before switching on the lights. The familiar bell above the entrance rang through an almost empty building. I walked the aisles while Ava stayed near the register, looking at shelves filled with products that had clearly been sitting there for years. Dust-covered boxes that should have been replaced long ago. Handwritten price tags hung crookedly from fading displays. It wasn't difficult to understand why customers had stopped coming. Only 2 people entered during the first hour. One bought a pack of screws. The other asked if they matched prices with larger stores. Robert quietly admitted they couldn't. The customer thanked him and walked back out. After the door closed, Robert leaned heavily against the counter. I never thought I'd see this place so empty. You don't have to stay here today, I said. I've been here almost 40 years. And that's exactly why your health matters more than this building. Before he could answer, a sharp cough interrupted him. He pressed a hand against his chest and his face turned pale. I immediately helped him into a chair while Ava brought him a bottle of water. I'm fine, he insisted. No, I replied firmly. You're exhausted. That afternoon we drove him to a follow-up appointment. The cardiologist reviewed his chart before looking directly at him. You survived the heart attack, the doctor said, but your body is warning you. If you keep carrying this level of stress, you're risking another one. Robert remained quiet. You need fewer working hours, proper rest, and someone else handling the daily pressure. This isn't a suggestion. The ride home felt unusually silent. When we returned to the house, Janice was sitting alone at the kitchen table with unpaid bills spread in front of her. She didn't bother hiding them. The bank called again, she said softly. Robert lowered himself into a chair. I know. They won't keep extending deadlines. Nobody argued because there was nothing left to argue about. Finally Janice looked at me. I spent years believing that if I controlled everything, nothing could fall apart. Her voice cracked. I controlled the business. I controlled this family. I tried to control your future. She covered her face with both hands. And now the store is dying, your father is sick, Claire barely visits unless she has to, and you built an entire life without us. Tears slipped through her fingers. I kept telling myself I was protecting this family, but all I really protected was my own pride. She looked up at me with red, tired eyes. I'm sorry. There was no explanation waiting behind the words. No attempt to blame the town, her marriage, or circumstances beyond her control. I was wrong, she continued. I hurt you because I cared too much about what other people thought. I chose appearances over my own daughter, and I can never give you those 8 years back. The room stayed quiet. For the first time since I had returned, my mother wasn't trying to defend herself. She simply sat there, surrounded by unpaid bills and fading Christmas decorations, facing the truth she had spent years refusing to see. I accepted my mother's apology, but I didn't pretend it erased the past. Some wounds become smaller with time, yet they never completely disappear. The next morning, Robert asked if I would take one look at the hardware store's finances before I left town. I don't expect a miracle, he said. I just want to understand how bad things really are. I agreed on one condition. I'm not writing a check. He nodded without hesitation. I wouldn't ask you to. We spent the next several hours in the tiny office behind the sales floor. Old invoices were stacked in boxes instead of filing cabinets. Inventory records were incomplete, supplier contracts hadn't been reviewed in years, and expenses kept climbing while sales steadily dropped. I closed the last folder. The business isn't failing because people stopped needing hardware. Robert looked at me. It's failing because the business never adapted. Ty joined us that afternoon carrying a notebook. I've been saying the same thing for years. I spread several sheets of paper across the desk. First, this building is too large for the amount of business you're doing. Close half the showroom and focus on the products customers actually buy. Ty nodded as he wrote. Second, stop ordering slow-moving inventory just because you've always carried it. Every shelf holding unsold merchandise is money sitting still. Robert listened carefully without interrupting. Third, renegotiate with your suppliers. Smaller orders delivered more frequently are better than filling a warehouse with products nobody purchases. Ty smiled. I can handle those meetings. You should, I replied. From now on, you're managing daily operations. Robert looked surprised. I'm still here. Yes, I said gently. But you shouldn't be running this place anymore. He lowered his eyes. This store has been my life. And that's exactly why it's time to let someone else carry it. You can advise. You can mentor. But you can't keep sacrificing your health. He didn't argue. Over the next few days we met with local suppliers, reviewed contracts and canceled unnecessary expenses. Several business owners agreed to better terms because they wanted the family store to survive. They simply needed someone willing to have practical conversations instead of refusing every suggestion. Back at the house, I gathered everyone around the dining table. This only works if everyone contributes. Claire looked up. What do you mean? I mean nobody waits for someone else to fix things. Ty manages the store. Robert retires from daily operations. Claire helps organize the financial records each week since she already handles bookkeeping at work. Mom takes care of customer calls and community outreach instead of trying to control every decision. Janice accepted the assignment without complaint. And you? Ty asked. I'll review the numbers remotely once a month and answer questions when they come up. That's all. Robert frowned. You could save us faster than that. I could, I admitted. But then you'd depend on me instead of learning how to stand on your own. Nobody objected. This wasn't a rescue. It was a fresh start built on responsibility. Every person had a role to play, and every improvement would come from consistent effort instead of one generous act. For the first time in years, the family stopped waiting for someone else to solve their problems and began doing the work themselves. The changes at the hardware store began producing small results before Ava and I were ready to leave Indiana. A few new customers came through the doors after Ty updated the inventory and started promoting the business locally. It wasn't enough to erase years of decline, but it proved the store still had a chance. On our final evening, my parents invited everyone to dinner. The atmosphere felt calmer than it had since I arrived. Nobody raised their voice and nobody pretended the past had never happened. As dessert was cleared away, Janice looked at me. You know, she began carefully, there's plenty of room here if you and Ava ever decide to come home. I had expected the question. I set down my coffee cup before answering. I appreciate that, but we're not moving back. Her smile faded slightly. You don't have to decide tonight. I already decided 8 years ago. The room became quiet. My life is in Nashville, I continued. My business is there. Ava's school is there. Our friends are there. That's our home. Janice nodded slowly, though disappointment was written across her face. I was hoping we could become a family again. We can, I said gently. Just not by returning to what we used to be. She looked confused. I don't understand. You keep thinking forgiveness means everything goes back to the way it was. It doesn't. Nobody interrupted. I've forgiven you because carrying anger for years only hurts me. But forgiveness doesn't erase boundaries. Those stay. Robert listened carefully. You'll still visit? He asked. Yes. You'll answer our calls? Of course. And you'll keep advising us about the business? I will, as long as everyone keeps doing their part. Janice took a deep breath. So what's changed? I decide what my relationship with this family looks like. She lowered her eyes. For years, every important decision about my life came from someone else. Where I should live, who I should marry, how I should raise my daughter. Those days are over. She nodded without arguing. Ava reached over and quietly squeezed my hand beneath the table. I won't let anyone make those choices for her either. Janice looked toward her granddaughter. I understand. For the first time I believed she actually did. As we prepared to leave the next morning, Robert hugged Ava tightly. Don't wait another 8 years. She smiled. We won't. Claire hugged me next. I'm glad you came back. I'm glad we talked honestly. Finally, Janice stepped forward. I know I haven't earned another chance. No, I answered truthfully. You haven't earned it. She accepted the words. But I'm willing to give you one anyway. Tears filled her eyes as she embraced me briefly before stepping away. Driving out of Fort Wayne, I didn't feel victorious because someone had suffered. I felt peaceful because I had finally learned the difference between revenge and self-respect. I had the power to demand apologies, hold grudges, or control everyone around me the way I'd once been controlled. Instead, I chose something far more valuable. I chose clear boundaries, a life built on my own decisions, and the freedom to protect the home Ava and I had created together. A year passed more quietly than anyone expected. The hardware store never returned to its old size, but it stopped losing money. Ty settled comfortably into managing the business. Robert kept his promise to stay retired. And Claire handled the bookkeeping without anyone questioning her decisions. Every few weeks we spoke by phone, usually about ordinary things instead of old arguments. When Christmas arrived again, Ava and I drove to Fort Wayne for the weekend. This trip felt different from the moment we packed the car. We weren't returning because we had nowhere else to go. We already had a home waiting for us in Nashville. We were simply visiting family. The house looked brighter than it had the year before. Fresh paint covered the porch, the broken fence had been repaired, and every string of Christmas lights actually worked. The changes weren't extravagant, but they reflected steady effort instead of quick fixes. Robert opened the door with a broad smile. I've been watching for your car all morning. Ava hugged him first. Merry Christmas, Grandpa. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Inside, the atmosphere felt relaxed. Nobody rushed to impress anyone. Claire laughed with her children in the living room while Ty carried trays of food from the kitchen. Even the conversation sounded lighter. Janice walked over holding a small wrapped gift. This is for you, Ava. You didn't have to get me anything. I wanted to. Ava carefully opened the package and found a silver bracelet with a tiny snowflake charm. It's beautiful. Janice smiled. Thank you. Ava looked puzzled. For what? For giving me another chance to be your grandmother. Ava slipped the bracelet onto her wrist. I like having a grandmother. Janice blinked back tears before quietly excusing herself to the dining room. As everyone prepared for dinner, I noticed her moving chairs around the table. She picked up one from the far end and placed it directly beside her own. Then she looked at me. I'd like you to sit here. I walked over. She rested one hand on the back of the chair. No one will ever ask you to leave this house again. I met her eyes for a moment before smiling politely. Thank you. There wasn't anything else that needed to be said. I took the seat not because I needed proof that I belonged, but because I was comfortable choosing it for myself. Dinner was filled with stories, jokes, and the kind of easy conversation that had once seemed impossible. Ava laughed with her cousins while Robert proudly described the latest improvements at the store. Nobody argued. Nobody tried to control anyone else's choices. Later that evening, as snow drifted gently outside the windows, I stood on the front porch for a moment before leaving. 8 years earlier, I had walked down those same steps carrying a frightened little girl into an uncertain future. Now that little girl stood behind me, confident and happy, calling that it was time to head home. Home. The word no longer meant this house or anyone's approval. It meant the life we had built through our own choices, the peace we refused to surrender, and the family we had rebuilt without losing ourselves. That was the greatest gift waiting for us every Christmas, and no one could ever take it away. What would you have done if you were in Leora's place? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every comment. If you enjoy stories that stay with you long after they end, be sure to subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.